There are few things in life that we can count on as absolute certainties. In fact, that's kind of the point of the matter. But one thing that is a certainty is that sometimes bad things are going to happen in freak and impossible ways, and people are going to get hurt or worse. But just like there are times when people get hurt in random ways, they can be saved by blind luck or something else. And when those stories happen, you're going to be blown away by them every time. So allow us to show you 8 lucky people who survived the impossible. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Number 8. Natalia Pasternak. In June 2015, Natalia Pasternak and her 80-year-old friend were walking through the woods and collecting the sap from birch trees. But what they didn't know at the time was that there was a big black bear nearby, and it didn't take too kindly to them being there. So much so that it went after her friend's dog before eventually going after Natalia herself. Her friend, who was again 80, realized that they needed help, so she ran off to get it, leaving Natalia alone versus a big and powerful bear. The bear mauled Natalia and did such a job on her that the bear thought she was dead, and then started to bury her so that it could eat her later. Eventually, the police did show up, and they found her and the bear, and realized that Natalia was still alive. They killed the bear so that they could get Natalia unopposed, and as a result of this, they were able to get her to a hospital where she made a full recovery. The true miracle here is that the bear thought she was dead, because if it thought she was alive, it would have finished the job easily. Number 7. Phineas Gage. To hear the story of Phineas Gage, you need to go all the way back to September of 1848. He was one of the leaders of a group that was trying to make a railroad in Vermont. But one day he was using an iron tampering rod on a bunch of explosives. Care to guess what happened next? Yep, the batch exploded and the rod he was using shot into his head. Specifically, it pierced through his left cheek and kept going until it impaled his brain and then came out the other end full tilt. In 9.999 out of 10 cases, he would have been dead on the spot, as the brain isn't meant to take that kind of damage. But yet, he was still alive. And what's more, he was able to walk to a coworker so that he could get medical treatment. The physician was amazed he was alive, but while he did recover in months' time or less, there were 2 side effects to this accident. The first was that he was blind in his left eye. Small price to pay overall, don't you think? The other was that his usually calm disposition was replaced with anger and a lack of social properness. It was later studied and found that the incident caused him to lose 15% of his brain, and that led to the switch in his personality. Number 6. Casey Wagner. If you look throughout history, you're going to find a bunch of people who have not just been struck by lightning, but have been struck by it and survived without serious side effects. But for Casey Wagner, he puts many of those stories to shame. You see, he was at a monster truck event when a massive storm came in and shut everything down. He was with a friend who was in a porta potty when Casey sought shelter under a tree, which for the record is something you should never do. Casey realized this when he saw sparks coming off of the tree and he was suddenly struck by lightning. Then, as he was falling to the ground, another bolt of lightning struck him. Now, one bolt is enough to kill you in the right instances, but 2 of them back to back, that should have been fatal. And yet not only did he survive, he was fine after only 1 day at the hospital, and he had no side effects, getting the doctors to label him as a miracle. Number 5. Sumbora. Sumbora has quite the story to tell, and it all started in August of 2018. His story was set in the Cambodia jungle, where he went and survived for 4 days without food, water, or a means of escape. The last one is critical because his lack of being able to escape was caused by him being literally wedged between 2 giant rocks and not being able to get free. How did that happen? He was exploring the forest for bat guano, which is used as a fertilizer and is thus valuable in the region. And when his flashlight fell down a crevice, he tried to retrieve it. He slipped and fell into the crevice instead, and thus got wedged between 2 rocks. His brother got worried and searched for him, finding him in the crevice. The rescue workers were so amazed and shocked by his situation that they took a now famous picture before going to work to rescue on him. It took over 10 hours to get him free, but they did it. He made a full recovery, and the mountain he was on has been declared a no-go zone for climbers, so something like this does not happen again. Number 4. Christine McKenzie. Skydiving, when done properly, is a very safe and adrenaline-inducing activity, one that Christine McKenzie loves so much that she did it over 100 times without issue. However, on her 112th skydive, the worst case scenario reared its ugly head, because as she was descending from the plane, she pulled her parachute and it failed to open. She tried her backup parachute and the lines got tangled, leading her to just careen through the air until she hit some power cables, which should have killed her, but instead it absorbed the impact and left her with just a broken pelvis. She lived, and she even noted she would go skydiving again. Number 3. Greg Rasmussen. Greg Rasmussen is an animal conservationist, and he does a lot of flying to try and find rare creatures to preserve. While going over a park in Zimbabwe, some heavy winds came around and caused his plane to crash into the ground. He lived, but he had 2 broken legs. Knowing he had to get out of there, he dragged himself to a tree for shelter. However, the animals of the park started to find him, and he had to repeatedly beat the plane he crashed in to scare them off. After doing this for about a day, he was rescued and then taken to a hospital. It took over 100 surgeries to get his legs back in a semi-functional shape, and the endeavor cost him 3 inches in height. But hey, that's a small price to pay considering the alternative. Number 2. Truman Duncan. Truman Duncan is known as the Miracle Man, and this is because in June of 2006, he went through an ordeal that would leave his body sliced in a major way. While he was working his job at the rail yard, he fell in between 2 carts of a train as it was moving. As he did, he was eventually caught between the wheels of the train that cut him through the pelvic, and his top half was thrown from the tracks. He stayed conscious though and was able to call 911. 23 surgeries and 4 months later, he was made well enough to live and work, and though he has to get around in a wheelchair, he is alive and has one heck of a story to tell. Number 1. Apollo 13. Easily, one of the most insane stories of survival didn't happen on Earth. It happened in space on the legendary and infamous Apollo 13. The mission was to follow in the footsteps of Apollo 11 and land on the moon. The 3-man crew, Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes, were all experienced in their own right, with Lovell having been in space multiple times. Everything seemed to be right for them home safely, including getting into a lunar module, which was something to be what they used to get to the moon's surface and back, and literally using one factor. They had limited power, food, and abilities in terms of what to do to keep themselves from going off course and landing safely. After many days of hardship, all 3 men were able to make it back home in one piece. It is considered one of the greatest feats of survival ever, especially in the space program. In fact, it was so grand that President Richard Nixon was there to meet them and honor them when they landed. Now this should not have worked. 1,000 things had to go right in order for them to survive, and yet they did. So what do you think? What do you think of this look at the people who were facing serious injury or even death and then somehow survived? Can you believe the luck that these people had? Which of these stories floored you the most in terms of the life-saving that went on? Do you know someone who had a similar story? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the channel.